These three works reveal that people rarely collapse because they lack intelligence. They collapse because they refuse to face the truth about themselves. People do not usually self-destruct because they know nothing. They self-destruct because they know enough to feel the warning, but not enough to obey it. They feel the contradiction. They see the damage forming. They recognize the bad pattern. Then they explain it away, repeat it, defend it, romanticize it, or hide it behind some story about freedom, suffering, pride, love, genius, loyalty, trauma, or destiny. That is why the brothers Karamazov, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and Jungian psychology belong together. One gives us the family drama of spiritual collapse. One gives us the lonely prophet of self-overcoming. One gives us the map of the unconscious forces we pretend are not controlling us. Together they explain a brutal human truth. People do not only fall apart because life wounds them. They fall apart because something inside them begins to cooperate with the wound. Books covered. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. The Jungian framework of shadow, persona and individuation, drawn from Carl Jung's psychology. The Brothers Karamazov was Dostoevsky's final novel, first published in 1879–80, and is widely treated as one of his greatest works. It centers on Fyodor Karamazov and his sons, with a patricide plot that becomes a psychological, spiritual, and moral investigation into freedom, guilt, and evil. Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra is not a normal novel. It is philosophical fiction, prophecy, poetry, and spiritual provocation at once. Nietzsche's wider philosophy challenged Christianity and traditional morality while stressing life, creativity, strength, self-overcoming, and the creation of values. Jung's psychology gives the third lens. The shadow refers to the disowned, rejected, or unconscious parts of the psyche. Individuation is the process of becoming more whole by integrating rather than denying what is hidden. The big idea connecting these books, the deeper link, is not simply dark psychology, it is division. Dostoevsky shows the divided family. Nietzsche shows the divided soul trying to climb beyond inherited morality. Jung shows the divided psyche, where the person you present to the world is not the full person running the show underneath. Each work is obsessed with the same problem. What happens when human beings refuse integration? Dmitri is divided between sensual chaos and moral nobility. Ivan is divided between intellectual rebellion and unbearable guilt. Alyosha is divided between spiritual innocence and the corrupt world he must enter. Zarathustra is divided between solitude and teaching, contempt and love, ascent and return. Jung's patient is divided between persona and shadow, conscious identity and buried truth. Self-destruction begins when those divisions are not recognized. A person becomes dangerous when one part of them builds a life, while another part quietly wants revenge on it. The Brothers Karamazov summary. The Brothers Karamazov begins with one of literature's most disgusting family centers, Fyodor Pavlovich Karamazov. He is vulgar, greedy, theatrical, selfish, and emotionally grotesque. He is not just a bad father. He is a source of contamination. His sons grow up around neglect, humiliation, resentment, and spiritual disorder. The three legitimate brothers appear to represent different answers to the same broken inheritance. Dmitri, the eldest, is passionate, impulsive, and sensual. He wants love, honor, money, pleasure, and redemption, often at the same time. He is capable of generosity and brutality in the same emotional breath. Ivan, the intellectual brother, is brilliant, skeptical, and spiritually tormented. He cannot accept a universe in which innocent suffering is permitted. His rebellion is not shallow atheism. It is moral outrage sharpened into metaphysical refusal. Alyosha, the youngest, is gentle, religious, and attached to the saintly elder Zosima. He appears to be the spiritual counterweight to the family's corruption. But Dostoevsky does not let him escape the world. Alyosha must carry faith into disorder, not hide from disorder inside faith. There is also Smerdyakov, Fyodor's illegitimate son and servant, a resentful, watchful and poisonous figure whose position in the household gives him proximity without belonging. He absorbs humiliation and converts it into cold revenge. The plot turns around a toxic triangle of money, sex, resentment, and father hatred. Dmitri and Fyodor both desire Grushenka, a woman who becomes the emotional battlefield between them. Dmitri also believes his father has cheated him financially. His rage becomes public, theatrical, and incriminating. He threatens Fyodor. He storms around desperate for money. He behaves exactly like the kind of man who could commit murder. Then Fyodor is killed. Dmitri becomes the obvious suspect because his emotions have left evidence everywhere. He has motive, history, violence, jealousy, and rage. Yet the deeper horror is that the murder is not only a legal mystery, it is a moral infection spreading across the family. Smerdyakov eventually reveals to Ivan that he committed the murder, but he also suggests that Ivan made it possible. Ivan's intellectual rebellion, his idea that without God moral boundaries become unstable, gave Smerdyakov the permission structure he needed. This destroys Ivan. He did not physically kill his father, but he begins to see that ideas are not harmless abstractions. A thought can become someone else's action. A philosophy can become a crime. A clever rebellion can be interpreted by a damaged soul as permission to destroy. Dmitri is convicted, despite the deeper truth being more complicated. Alyosha remains the figure of spiritual tenderness, especially in his care for the boys, and his final message about memory, love, and moral responsibility. The ending does not neatly repair the world. It leaves us with law, guilt, miscarriage of justice, spiritual endurance, and the possibility that love may preserve something even when truth fails publicly. The plot in one flow. A corrupt father raises sons who each inherit a different fragment of his disorder. Dmitri inherits appetite and emotional excess. Ivan inherits rebellion and alienated intelligence. Alyosha inherits the possibility of spiritual healing. Smerdyakov inherits rejection and resentment. The family conflict intensifies around money and desire. Dmitri's rage at Fyodor becomes so visible that when Fyodor is murdered, Dmitri appears doomed by his own behaviour. Yet the real murderer is Smerdyakov, whose act grows out of hidden resentment and Ivan's dangerous abstractions. The emotional arc is devastating, because nearly everyone is guilty in a different way. Dmitri is guilty of chaos, but not the murder. Ivan is guilty of influence, but not physical action. Smerdyakov is guilty of the crime, but also represents the poisoned consequence of a household built on contempt. Fyodor is the victim, but also the source of much of the family's corruption. The novel ends by refusing simple, moral bookkeeping. Dostoevsky's point is not that guilt is always legal. It is that human beings participate in destruction long before the final act occurs. If you only remember 3 ideas. The first idea is that disorder reproduces itself through families. Fyodor does not merely neglect his children. He creates a moral climate. His sons do not simply dislike him. They are shaped against him, around him and through him. Self-destruction often begins in inherited emotional weather. The second idea is that intelligence does not protect people from collapse. Ivan is brilliant, but his brilliance cannot save him from guilt. His mind can dismantle belief, but it cannot survive the emotional consequences of what it has unleashed. Thought without integration becomes dangerous. The third idea is that guilt is larger than crime. The law asks who killed Fyodor. The novel asks who helped create the conditions in which killing became possible. That is a much more frightening question. The sentence that explains the entire book. A person can be innocent of the act and still guilty of feeding the darkness that made the act possible. Why this book still matters. The brothers Karamazov still matters because modern people are surrounded by the same illusion Ivan suffers from, that ideas have no consequences until someone acts on them. Online culture rewards detachment. People say things, imply things, radicalize others, humiliate others, then retreat behind irony or abstraction. Dostoevsky understood that thoughts are not sealed inside the skull. They leak into families, politics, relationships, and violence. The book also explains why people self-destruct in ways that look irrational from the outside. Dmitri knows he is making himself look guilty. Ivan knows he is spiritually cornering himself. Smerdyakov knows revenge will not make him whole. Yet all of them keep moving toward ruin because each is governed by a deeper wound. If written today, the novel might include digital humiliation, public performance, ideological extremism, and algorithmic reinforcement. But the core would not change. The divided soul remains the same. Where the book is weakest, the novel is long, dense, and philosophically demanding. Some readers may find the courtroom material slow, the theological discussions heavy, and the symbolic structure overwhelming. Its female characters are powerful, but often filtered through male spiritual crisis, desire and projection. Grushenka and Katerina matter enormously, but the emotional architecture remains heavily centered on male guilt, male rivalry, and male metaphysical struggle. The book is also easy to misuse. Some readers reduce it to a simple religious argument. That flattens it. Dostoevsky is not merely saying believe or collapse. He is asking what happens when freedom is separated from responsibility, intellect from love, and desire from conscience. Who should ignore this book? Readers wanting fast lessons, clean psychology, or a simple murder mystery may struggle. This is not a productivity book. It does not give neat steps. It forces the reader into contradiction, guilt, faith, disgust, and compassion. Anyone unwilling to sit with moral ambiguity may find it unbearable. How this compares to Thus Spoke Zarathustra. The brothers Karamazov descends into the family cellar. Thus Spoke Zarathustra climbs a mountain. Dostoevsky asks what happens when corrupted love, resentment, and guilt destroy the soul. Nietzsche asks what happens when inherited values are no longer strong enough to command the soul. The emotional difference is massive. Dostoevsky is intimate, muddy, tearful, and human. Nietzsche is elevated, thunderous, symbolic, and lonely. But the two books meet at one point. Both are terrified of a human being who is free, but not whole. Thus Spoke Zarathustra summary. Thus Spoke Zarathustra begins with Zarathustra leaving solitude. He has spent years in the mountains, withdrawn from ordinary life. Now he descends to speak to humanity. This descent matters. He is not merely escaping the world. He is returning to challenge it. His message is explosive. Humanity is something to be overcome. Zarathustra introduces the idea of the Übermensch, often translated as Overman or Superman, though both terms can mislead. The point is not comic book power or crude domination. It is the human being who creates values rather than merely inheriting them. Zarathustra sees ordinary humanity as trapped between animal instinct and higher possibility. People cling to comfort, herd approval, resentment, stale morality, and fear. They do not want transformation. They want safety disguised as virtue. One of the most important figures he presents is the last man. The last man is comfortable, shallow, and spiritually exhausted. He avoids danger. He avoids greatness. He avoids pain. He wants pleasure, equality, security, and ease without transcendence. The last man does not destroy himself through dramatic sin. He destroys himself through spiritual smallness. This is Nietzsche's terrifying inversion. Self-destruction does not always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like comfort. As Zarathustra teaches, he is repeatedly misunderstood. Crowds do not grasp him. Disciples distort him. He struggles with loneliness because the person who tries to speak beyond the values of his age cannot rely on applause from that age. The book moves through speeches, parables, symbolic encounters, and inner struggles. Zarathustra attacks pity when it weakens life. He attacks resentment when it disguises itself as morality. He attacks priests, moralists, and herd thinking. But he also struggles with his own temptation toward disgust. If he despises humanity too much, he fails his own teaching. His journey is not simply to become stronger than others. It is to become strong enough to affirm existence itself. This culminates in the idea of eternal recurrence, the terrifying test of whether one could will one's life again, exactly as it was, with its suffering, mistakes, losses, and humiliations included. That is Nietzsche's ultimate psychological pressure test. Can you say yes to life without needing it rewritten? If not, then your apparent strength may still be resentment. The plot, in one flow. Zarathustra leaves solitude because wisdom that never returns to life is incomplete. He descends to teach humanity that it must overcome itself. But he quickly discovers that people prefer comfort to transformation. His message is too demanding for the crowd. They want entertainment, safety, and reassurance. He offers danger, ascent, and responsibility. He gathers followers but repeatedly learns that even disciples can become another herd. They may admire the teacher while avoiding the transformation. Zarathustra must therefore keep moving, keep withdrawing, keep returning, keep purifying his message. The drama is internal as much as external. He is fighting not only society's weakness, but his own disgust, loneliness, and temptation to become merely superior. The highest figure in the book is not someone who sneers at mankind. It is someone who can overcome resentment so completely that he can affirm life. The ending does not function like a normal resolution. Zarathustra's journey remains symbolic and unfinished. The reader is not given a settled doctrine. The reader is pushed into a demand: overcome yourself or become the last man. If you only remember 3 ideas. The first idea is that comfort can be a form of decay. The last man is not starving, broken, or visibly ruined. He is safe, entertained, and spiritually flat. Nietzsche's warning is that people can self-destruct by shrinking their own standards until nothing noble remains. The second idea is that inherited morality can become a hiding place. Nietzsche is not simply telling people to do whatever they want. He is attacking values that have lost their life force but still control people through guilt, conformity, and resentment. The self-destructive person may obey rules not because they are good, but because obedience protects them from becoming responsible. The third idea is that self-overcoming is not self-esteem. Zarathustra does not offer comfort language. He demands transformation. The task is not to feel better about the current self. The task is to become capable of creating, bearing, and affirming a higher self. The sentence that explains the entire book. The person who cannot overcome himself will eventually call his weakness morality, his fear wisdom, and his comfort happiness. Why this book still matters. Thus spoke Zarathustra matters, because modern culture is filled with last man temptations. Endless comfort, infinite distraction, public morality without private transformation, identity without discipline, opinion without courage, performance without sacrifice. Nietzsche saw that when traditional values weaken, people do not automatically become free. They may become hollow. Freedom without self-command becomes drift. Rebellion without creation becomes pose. Individualism without inner hierarchy becomes chaos. This is why the book remains so dangerous and useful. It does not flatter the reader. It asks whether your values are truly yours, or merely inherited slogans with your name attached. Where the book is weakest. Thus spoke Zarathustra is easy to misunderstand because it speaks in symbol, intensity, and exaggeration. Its style can feel intoxicating, which is both its power and its risk. Some readers mistake Nietzsche's call to self-overcoming for permission to become arrogant, cruel, or theatrically superior. That is one of the internet's favorite misreadings. The book is also deliberately elusive. It does not give a stable system. It provokes more than it instructs. For readers seeking clear ethical boundaries, that can be frustrating. Its greatest weakness is also its danger. It can inspire transformation in serious readers and narcissistic posturing in shallow ones. Who should ignore this book? Readers who want calm, practical guidance may find it maddening. Anyone currently drawn to grandiosity, contempt, or superiority should approach it carefully. Nietzsche is powerful medicine, but badly understood Nietzsche can become poison. How this compares to Jung. Nietzsche gives the command, overcome yourself. Jung asks the follow-up, which self are you trying to overcome? That question changes everything, because many people use self-overcoming as another mask. They build discipline while hiding grief. They chase greatness while avoiding shame. They reinvent themselves while leaving the shadow untouched. Nietzsche shows the mountain. Jung shows the basement. Jung's summary. Jungian psychology begins from the idea that the conscious self is not the whole self. The person you think you are is only part of the psychic system. Beneath the conscious personality sit rejected emotions, inherited patterns, instincts, memories, images, fears, and impulses. These do not disappear because they are ignored. They become indirect. This is the key to Jung's relevance to self-destruction. People often ruin their lives, not because they consciously want ruin, but because unconscious material begins to sabotage the conscious plan. A person says they want love, but repeatedly chooses people who confirm their abandonment wound. A person says they want success, but misses deadlines, provokes authority, drinks before important moments, or creates chaos when stability appears. A person says they want peace, but keeps returning to conflict, because conflict is the only emotional climate that feels familiar. Jung would not treat these merely as bad habits. He would ask what hidden part of the psyche is getting expressed through them. The persona is the mask or social identity. It is the version of the self adapted for the world. It can be useful. Everyone needs some social face. But when a person identifies too strongly with the persona, they become false, even to themselves. The shadow is what the persona excludes. If someone's persona is kind, their shadow may contain rage. If their persona is strong, the shadow may contain dependency. If their persona is rational, the shadow may contain superstition, emotion, or chaos. If their persona is morally pure, the shadow may contain cruelty. The shadow is not only evil, it also contains undeveloped vitality. But when denied, it often returns in destructive form. Projection is one of the ways this happens. People see in others what they cannot face in themselves. The controlling person sees everyone else as manipulative. The resentful person sees everyone else as arrogant. The coward sees caution as wisdom. The secretly cruel person becomes obsessed with condemning cruelty elsewhere. Individuation is Jung's answer. It is not simple self-improvement. It is the movement toward wholeness. The person becomes less possessed by unconscious forces because they begin to recognize, name, and integrate them. This is not comfortable work. Jung's framework implies that the self-destructive pattern is often meaningful. It is not random stupidity. It is the psyche trying to reveal an unresolved contradiction, the plot in one flow. Jungian psychology does not have a plot in the ordinary fictional sense, but it does have a psychological drama. A person begins identified with the conscious self. They believe they know who they are. They build a persona that earns approval, safety, or status. Over time, everything that does not fit that persona is pushed away. But the rejected material does not vanish. It returns through dreams, symptoms, compulsions, attraction, rage, envy, projection, and repeated life patterns. The person begins to experience fate, as if the same disaster keeps arriving from outside. But Jung's lens asks whether the person is unconsciously participating in the repetition. The turning point comes when the person stops asking only, why does this keep happening to me? And begins asking what part of me keeps choosing, inviting, tolerating, or recreating this. That is the beginning of individuation. The resolution is not perfection. It is increased wholeness. The person becomes harder to possess because they have fewer unknown rooms inside themselves. If you only remember 3 ideas, the first idea is that what you refuse to know about yourself does not stop existing. It becomes behaviour. It becomes projection. It becomes attraction. It becomes sabotage. The unconscious always finds a route. The second idea is that your public identity may be hiding your private danger. A person can be successful, articulate, moral, disciplined, or admired, while still being governed by disowned fear, rage, shame, or envy. The mask may function socially, while failing psychologically. The third idea is that integration beats suppression. Trying to destroy the shadow usually strengthens it. The task is not to indulge every impulse, but to make the hidden material conscious enough that it no longer controls the person from below. The sentence that explains the entire framework. Until the hidden self is recognized, a person will keep mistaking their own unconscious pattern for bad luck. Why Jung still matters? Jung matters now because modern identity is heavily performative. People build brands, profiles, politics, aesthetics, moral positions, and lifestyle narratives. But the more polished the persona becomes, the more dangerous the unexamined shadow can be. This is why Jung is so useful for understanding self-sabotage. He explains why a person can publicly want one thing and privately keep engineering the opposite. The contradiction is not hypocrisy alone. It is psychic division. Jung's ideas remain influential because they name experiences ordinary language struggles to explain. Recurring patterns, symbolic dreams, irrational attractions, sudden collapses, compulsive enemies, moral projection, and the eerie feeling that one is being driven by something older than conscious choice. Where Jung is weakest. Jung can become vague when handled badly. The language of shadow, archetypes, and individuation can become mystical fog if not tied to behaviour. It is easy for people to use Jungian terms to sound deep while avoiding practical change. There is also a risk of over-symbolizing everything. Not every mistake is an archetypal drama. Sometimes a bad decision is simply a bad decision. Sometimes a pattern needs therapy, accountability, rest, structure, or medical support, not symbolic interpretation alone. Jung is strongest when his ideas are forced back into concrete life. What do you do repeatedly? What do you avoid? Who do you blame? What emotion embarrasses you? What truth would collapse your persona if admitted? That is where Jung becomes useful. Who should ignore Jung? People who want quick fixes may find Jung frustrating. So will people who only want external blame. Jung's framework does not deny that others can harm you, but it keeps returning attention to your own participation, perception, and unconscious repetition. Anyone using Jungian language to avoid responsibility should stop immediately. Shadow work is not an excuse for bad behaviour. It is a demand to stop being secretly governed by it. The common themes running through all these books. The first common theme is self-division. Dmitri, Ivan, Zarathustra, and the Jungian subject are all split. They do not suffer merely because life is hard. They suffer because they are not internally unified. The second theme is freedom. Dostoevsky fears freedom without moral responsibility. Nietzsche fears morality without freedom. Jung fears consciousness without integration. Each sees a different failure mode. The third theme is resentment. Smerdyakov's resentment becomes murder. Nietzsche sees resentment as morality turned poisonous. Jung sees resentment as a clue to projection and shadow. Across all three, resentment is never just emotion. It is a worldview forming in the dark. The fourth theme is the danger of false innocence. Ivan wants to remain intellectually innocent of Smerdyakov's act. The last man wants to remain innocent by avoiding greatness. The persona wants to remain innocent by hiding the shadow. But innocence that depends on denial is not innocence. It is evasion. The fifth theme is transformation through confrontation. No one becomes whole by comfort alone. Dostoevsky demands moral confrontation. Nietzsche demands existential confrontation. Jung demands psychological confrontation. The hidden pattern across all these books. The hidden pattern is this. Self-destruction is usually a failed negotiation with truth. A person knows something, but will not fully know it. Dmitri knows his passions are making him dangerous. Ivan knows his ideas are not emotionally neutral. Zarathustra knows humanity may not want the transformation he offers. The Jungian subject knows, somewhere underneath, that the repeated pattern is not accidental. But knowing is painful. So the person delays. They dramatize. They intellectualize. They moralize. They blame. They perform strength. They perform innocence. They perform victimhood. They perform superiority. Eventually the avoided truth returns as fate. That is the great revelation across all three. What is not faced internally often returns externally as crisis, where the books quietly disagree. Dostoevsky and Nietzsche disagree most sharply over religion and morality. Dostoevsky sees spiritual collapse as catastrophic. Nietzsche sees inherited religious morality as potentially life-denying. Dostoevsky worries that without sacred responsibility, freedom becomes murder. Nietzsche worries that with inherited guilt, vitality becomes sickness. Jung sits between them. He does not simply choose doctrine or rebellion. He asks what psychic function belief, myth, symbol, and morality serve. For Jung, the question is not only whether an idea is true in a narrow rational sense, it is whether the psyche can live without what that idea once contained. Dostoevsky says, man needs redemption. Nietzsche says, man needs overcoming. Jung says, man needs integration. The tension between them is the whole problem of modern life. What most people misunderstand about these books. People misunderstand the brothers Karamazov when they treat it as only a religious novel or only a murder mystery. It is both. But it is also a study of how families create moral atmospheres. People misunderstand, thus spoke Zarathustra, when they treat it as a license for ego. Nietzsche is not telling mediocre people to call themselves gods. He is asking whether anyone has the strength to create values without collapsing into resentment, comfort, or cruelty. People misunderstand Jung when they treat shadow work as aesthetic darkness. The shadow is not a personality accessory. It is the material that can destroy your life if you keep pretending it belongs only to other people. The surface reading is, these works are about morality, greatness, and the unconscious. The deeper reading is, they are about what happens when a person cannot bear the truth of their own freedom. What the internet gets wrong about these books. The internet turns Dostoevsky into quotes about suffering. That misses the architecture. Dostoevsky is not romanticizing pain. He is showing how pain becomes either compassion, madness, faith, resentment, or violence, depending on the soul that receives it. The internet turns Nietzsche into confidence content. That is worse. Nietzsche is not a motivational speaker for people who want to feel exceptional. He is a destroyer of comforting lies, including the lies people tell themselves about their own superiority. The internet turns Jung into shadow work branding, dark aesthetics, journaling prompts, vague talk of healing. But Jung's real challenge is harsher. The thing you hate outside yourself may be carrying information about what you refuse to recognize inside yourself. Book summary culture often compresses these works into lessons, but their power is not in lessons alone. Their power is in pressure. They do not simply tell you what to think. They make it harder to keep lying. The self-destruction loop. The shared framework across Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and Jung is the self-destruction loop. It has 5 stages. First, the wound. This may be humiliation, neglect, loss, shame, rejection, fear, or inherited disorder. In the brothers Karamazov, the wound is family corruption. In Nietzsche, it is the crisis of values. In Jung, it is the split between conscious identity and unconscious material. Second, the false solution. The person chooses a strategy that appears to solve the wound, but actually preserves it. Dmitri chooses passion. Ivan chooses intellect. The last man chooses comfort. The persona chooses performance. Third, the split. The person becomes divided between what they say they want and what their behaviour reveals. This is the moment where self-sabotage becomes visible. Their stated goal and repeated pattern no longer match. Fourth, the projection. Instead of facing the split, the person externalizes it. They blame the father, society, morality, weakness, enemies, bad luck, partners, institutions, or fate. Sometimes those things really are partly responsible, but projection becomes destructive when it removes all self-knowledge. Fifth, the reckoning. The truth returns. It may return as guilt, collapse, exposure, repetition, depression, betrayal, addiction, rage, or spiritual emptiness. The person finally meets the avoided material, but usually after unnecessary damage has been done. The loop can be interrupted at only one point, before projection becomes destiny. That requires a person to ask the question nobody wants to ask. What am I getting from the pattern I claim to hate? The real-life test. In careers, self-destruction often appears as repeated conflict with authority, missed opportunities, perfectionism, procrastination, or the need to be seen as brilliant before being seen as reliable. In relationships, it appears as choosing unavailable people, testing loyalty until it breaks, confusing intensity with intimacy, or punishing someone for wounds they did not create. With money, it appears as spending to regulate emotion, avoiding numbers, chasing status, or treating financial discipline as a threat to freedom. In leadership, it appears as charisma without self-control, vision without humility, or moral language used to hide ego. With health, it appears as knowing exactly what would help, and repeatedly not doing it. The pattern is nearly always the same. The conscious self announces the aim, while the hidden self protects the wound. How to apply these lessons without turning them into another self-help fantasy. Do not start with affirmations. Start with evidence. Look at what you repeatedly do, not what you repeatedly say. Behaviour is the autobiography of the unconscious. Track the contradiction. Where do your stated values and repeated actions diverge? That gap is more important than your intentions. Name the reward. Every self-destructive pattern gives something: relief, drama, control, revenge, identity, avoidance, attention, or familiarity. Until you identify the reward, the pattern will survive your motivation. Reduce the theatre. Many people make change dramatic because drama allows them to feel transformed before they behave differently. Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and Jung all warn against this in different ways. The real test is not emotional intensity. It is sustained integration. Finally, stop confusing insight with change. Ivan has insight. Zarathustra has insight. Jung's patient may have insight, but insight only matters when it alters behaviour under pressure. Which book should you read first? Best entry point: The Brothers Karamazov. Read it first if you want story, family drama, moral conflict, and emotional force. It is the most human of the three. Deepest philosophical provocation. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Read it when you want to be challenged, unsettled and pushed into questions about values, courage and self-overcoming. Most practical psychological lens. Jung. Start with Jung if your main interest is patterns, relationships, projection, shadow work, and repeated self-sabotage. Best order for this theme. The Brothers Karamazov first, because it makes self-destruction emotionally visible. Jung second, because it gives language to the hidden forces underneath the behaviour. Thus spoke Zarathustra third, because it asks what a person must become after the old self has been exposed. 5 questions to test whether you actually understood these books. What pattern in your life keeps repeating, even though you consciously claim to hate it? Where are you using intelligence to avoid responsibility? Which part of your public identity would be threatened if you admitted the full truth about yourself? Are your values truly chosen, or are they inherited reactions against people you resent? What would change if you stopped asking, "Why does this happen to me?" and started asking, "How do I participate in its return?" The final lesson. The terrifying lesson of the brothers Karamazov, thus spoke Zarathustra and Jung, is that the enemy is not simply desire, weakness, society, trauma, family, religion, nihilism, or the unconscious. The enemy is the divided self that refuses to become conscious. Dostoevsky shows the soul collapsing under guilt. Nietzsche shows the soul shrinking under comfort and inherited values. Jung shows the soul being ruled by what it refuses to recognize. Together they reveal why people self-destruct. Not because they are stupid, not because they are doomed, not because they lack advice, but because somewhere inside, the truth has already knocked, and the person has decided not to answer.